What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Buffalo Fatherhood Initiative podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Sherman Webb Middlebrooks, the lifelong Buffalo resident and full-time black man. And as usual, I'm joined with my player partner over here.
Welcome back, Antoine Johnson, Buffalo Fatherhood Initiative Program Manager, and we're glad that you're back here with us. We got some good conversation. But first, how you feeling today, sir?
Oh man, feeling good. And I don't really like saying good when I'm doing check-ins, especially with young people. That's a word that I don't let people get away with. Okay. It's like a basic generic word. But man, I would definitely say good is the foundation. I'm super grateful. I'm in the space of a lot of gratitude. I went through like a nice valley, and now I'm just climbing my next mountain. So that's the way I like to look at it. I got to the top of one mountain, some things happened, put me in a valley, and now I'm hiking up the next hill.
I feel like a lot of life is like that sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that now with my experience with parenting and it just work, balance, family. Like it's just it has those ebbs and flows, those valleys and peaks, right. All that stuff. You know, I think as a man that it is increasingly, and a black man, increasingly more difficult to be able to talk about the challenges associated with that. And here I'm getting to some deep stuff already, but I think that a lot of times that the perception is we should be able to shoulder or just deal with the things that are presented to us without complaining or talking about them, right? And then I think you made a good point. You said you don't like just using the word good, because I think a lot of times we just say, "Oh, I'm good." If people ask us how we do, especially men, I'm good. Yeah. We could be messed up or just whatever, but that's what we say because that's what we have been socialized to say.
Right. That's why I caught myself after I said it. I was like, nah, if you was doing a circle with some young people, you wouldn't have allowed that to fly. Yeah. So, that's why I had to act. I'm in the spirit of gratitude on top of that, too, because I'm like, I'm good, this ain't it. But you reminded me of a conversation that I had with a good friend of mine, Brother Charles Clark, who also does some media content. Shout out to Brother Magazine. So we were at dinner yesterday, and we were having this conversation about can men be vulnerable with other men? And we kind of arrived at a place where it's like, yeah, not off the rip, though. Yep. So, if I'm just casually asking you how you doing or what's up with you, I'm not about to just, open up right then and there and be as vulnerable. But, like I explained to Brother Charles, we doing that right now. We having a dialogue and exchange, but, it's a relationship. I've known this brother for years, so, I can trust him, he can trust me. Right. And so I think, once you establish that relationship, then you could be vulnerable. Yep. But I think once you get to a certain age, it's difficult for men to make new friends and to be able to establish and make those connections. And especially if, so one of my best friends from college came over here. He's a military kid, came over here from Germany. Yeah. And I would just take him back to the block. And I'm like, man, I don't even remember when I met. Dude, that's just been my friend forever. He's like, bro, I wish I had that. I can't say I had friends since 4 or 5 years old, since the sandbox, or we in our 30s and saying that I had friends for 20 years because he had to move around a lot. So I think I've been privileged and kind of maybe taking that for granted that I have had so many meaningful relationships with other men in the community that's my peers or older or younger, where I'm safe enough and feel okay being vulnerable. Yeah. And maybe that's not the experience of most men.
No, I don't think it is. So statistically, as men get older, they have less friends. That's what studies show. And just intuitively, after I read that, I'm like, I can kind of relate to that because just going through school, it's you had your buddies, your boys, whatever. And then it's as I started getting older, got married, got kids, I was there's fewer and fewer people that either want to hang out with or I just don't have time, you know? Yep. And so I think as men, we have to be really intentional about creating spaces or inviting people into our lives to be vulnerable with. We can be vulnerable with them, allowing them to be vulnerable with us, so that we don't feel like we're on an island by ourselves, because
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of times why we struggle with like depression.
Absolutely.
Or, just feeling like we're doing life alone, even if we have family. Because then there are some men that cannot be vulnerable with the women in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates a whole different challenge or dynamic. That this is kind of a good segue into something I want to talk about today around mothers raising boys.
Yeah.
I think you and I might have talked about that in episodes past in terms of like our mothers, how they brought us up and stuff like that, but we didn't necessarily talk about like just in a general sense, like mothers raising up boys. I know that sometimes I have like people at my church in the past, like, yo, I want you to mentor my son or whatever, because their dad is not in their life or whatever. And I'm just, usually I'm like, yeah, like I'm open to that, especially before I got married, because I had time.
Right.
Now I'm real selective with that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But let's talk a little bit about, single moms that are out there, whether they're married or single. How can they begin to help raise up like emotionally healthy boys to launch them off in the world in a way that they feel like confident in a way that they're going to live their lives?
So I wouldn't say I struggle with that. I would say like I pontificate on this matter quite often. And so some of the things that like I think I've settled on is that both, because I look at it from both sides. Mm-hmm. So like anything that like I would kind of like ask a mother to do with a single mother, mm-hmm. like I would ask like a single father to do. Mm-hmm. But like also I think it's a difference between being like a single parent and having no support, or just being a single person with a child. So like if your child goes with the other parent 50 to 30% of the time, and like you have freedom to like bust moves, grow in your career, maintain personal friendships and relationships, and you got another person you can count on like a co-parenting partner, then like you ain't really a single parent, like, because it's not all on you. And I think that goes both ways, because there are some single dads that's out there and mom's not in the picture. But I think in either case, it starts with having like a level of respect for the other person and understanding that like they're not better, they're not less than. It's about balance, and each parent provides some degree of value. So like mom has different values to offer than dad. Dad has different values to offer than mom. And if dad is like, no, listen to your mom, she can offer you a perspective and a view and an energy that I can't. Right. Like, and I appreciate and value her for doing that. And mom is able to say, listen, your dad can offer you a perspective from a man that like I can never give you. So I think it starts with having like a respect and appreciation for what the other parent and partner is able to contribute. And then I seen this post on Facebook, and it meant a lot. And it registered with me. It was like it was at like a football field, and the sign said like, when you bring your kids here, like let your kids be coached. So like a lot of times parents try to make the path for their kid as easy as possible. They like to make excuses for their kid, and especially we see that a lot in sports and in school. And it's like you send your kid to school, they get in trouble. Like, and instead of like rectifying the situation or changing their behavior with your child, you want to be in the uproar with school and with the teacher when like you can fix some of these issues at home. I send my kid to your athletic team or program or whatever, and they're misbehaving, like now you want to, or they're not getting as much shine or burn, now you want to get mad at the coach. Instead of thinking like, well, what can you be doing at home to like help improve your child's performance or behavior, whatever the case may be. So I think like allowing other people to like coach and have influence on your kids and not have like too much of an ego. Where like you can't allow somebody else's opinions or values to be shared, but you got to have enough people around you who you respect and appreciate in order to allow them to influence your child.
So let's talk about that for a minute, and let's also speak directly to like the single moms that you described that may not have another parent to lean on.
Right.
Because I was in that situation at one point as a child, but before I talk about that. You mentioned something around like allowing your child to be coached or taught. And I think innately for mothers, like, because they have that mama bear syndrome, like they I think more often than not, like they trying to protect their babies, right? Like they don't want nobody being too hard on them,
Right.
or whatever. They don't want,
Exactly. That's the point. Yeah.
And I get that to an extent, because again, I was a boy, I had a mother, and I'm a husband, and I have a wife now who is like mama bear. Even I do some stuff sometimes, and she get all over me like, don't be so hard, or don't X, Y, and Z. And sometimes I do need to reel it in, but other times I'm like, no, like they need to understand, like this, I'm not playing.
That's the value that dad brings.
Right.
That's the,
So let's speak really quick to that single mom who is out there and she's like, man, like I don't have no support. Like I don't have the other father because he ain't doing what he's supposed to be doing. What does she need to know to help her raise her son or sons up in this world, to be able to display like positive, healthy masculinity?
So wow. Because I think what's positive masculinity to us as men, it might be totally different.
It's all relative.
It's all relative. So like, I think she would have to evaluate what's her idea of a healthy masculine male.
Yeah.
And like start from there, because if her idea of what a healthy male is, which I don't know, maybe she made some poor choices and misperceived what a healthy male was, and that's how she's in this situation. But I think it will start with like her assessment of like what a healthy male is. But I think
so really quick before I'm gonna interrupt really quick, because I think you are hitting on something that's so important. So I think and what you're saying is have goals or an expectation of what the vision you have for him. And like you're saying, it can and is going to look different from household to household, but have an expectation of what you want him to be.
Yeah, at least have a vision.
Yeah.
And then you can see those traits and qualities around certain people, and then you can make those requests. Can you mentor my son? Or I can sign my child up for your program because I see a character trait or a quality in you that I wouldn't mind you imparting into my child. Yeah. I think the other thing too is it's that ego thing. And we all have egos. Right. And I feel like sometimes single moms or single parents in general, but single moms like look at that as like this ill badge of honor, where it's like, I got this, I don't need nobody, and like I got it.
Right. I'm the mom and the dad.
Yeah, I'm the mom and the dad, and I don't need nobody. And so it's like, well, how do you help somebody who don't think they need help?
Yes. Yeah.
So like it's that level of humility of saying like, I can't do it all on my own. I'm not supposed to do it all on my own. I'm in this situation. So like, let me just allow people that I trust to like, first I gotta learn how to trust. So that like, once I learn how to trust and allow people that I trust, respect, and admire to have access to my child, and then not get in the way. Because the thing that you mentioned is like, sometimes like you need a solid place to land. Like as a kid, as a young person, like, but as a boy, we're talking about sons in this case, you need a soft place to land because the world is going to be tough and eat you up and spit you out. Yeah. But also because the world is tough and is going to eat you up and spit you out, you got to have a firm place to like knock up against. So like, you got to have balance. Yeah. So like, that leads to like kids not knowing how to trust their mom, knowing like what to expect from their mom. Because like, are you gonna be the soft place to land for me, or are you gonna be the firm place that like holds me accountable? And so it's that balance. So I think just being able to like humble yourself and know that it's okay to like ask for help.
Right. And then sometimes as parents we overcompensate. Yeah, right. Absolutely. We overcompensate, and we do a bunch of different like programming and groups for fathers particularly, but whether you're a father or mother, it doesn't matter, because we have some men that say, I didn't get X, Y, and Z as a child, and so now I'm trying to give my kid the world. Yep. I don't care how much debt I have or what my problems are. I'm going to give them everything that I wanted. And it's like, okay, now that could be traced back to like stuff that you didn't have. You're trying to fill a void. Absolutely. With them now. And moms could do the same thing. Like, all right, I don't got 2 people in the household, so I got to be extra hard because I don't want them to think that life is going to be gummy bears and Skittles. Right. Right. And then like for my mother's case, she was really with the parent, I'm gonna use one of the parenting traits or terms, permissive,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Where like she was not, she cared deeply,
Yeah.
but she was kind of helicopter. And after a while, when I became like a teenager, I really started to like push up against that. I'm like, I want to be my own person,
Right.
right? I'm a man. I didn't have my father necessarily, but I understood that like there are things that she was as a woman that I wasn't learning from her that I wanted to, not really understanding that that's what I was doing.
Right.
And so I think that for mothers, whether you're single or married, like just having that understanding that like your son at some point going into manhood wants his own identity.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
It's normal.
Right? That is not a slight on you as mom. That's not, doesn't mean you ain't doing your job. It just means that he wants his own identity and being able to like be there without hovering is going to be super important, right? In terms of allowing him to grow in that autonomy and even like make mistakes. Because we talked about some moms not wanting their sons to like experience like the hard parts of life.
Right.
And now we even have, I see and hear like studies or whatever where like parents are letting their sons and stuff live in the house till they're like 25, 30. But I'm like, that's crazy to me because I would never want to do that as a young person.
So, as a son, I wouldn't want to be that son. No, I think you bring up some tremendous points. So definitely like I wouldn't want to be that son, but I think that like we do our kids no favors by like trying to make their path easy.
Right.
Like I've seen it like in some 2-parent households. Like I've seen it like even with like my little brother that like, and he had my dad and my stepmom in the house every day since day one, still to this day. So I've seen them like overcompensate because like my little brother never spent the night in the projects, but like I spent the majority of my life growing up like in the projects, experienced all kinds of things that like my little brother like would never know, and like my stepmom would always like try to like shelter my little brother. But then once he got in his 20s, like they magically expected him to like know how to be independent and think for himself and bust moves. And like now they're holding him to a standard out of nowhere that they never expected him before. And he's struggling. I'm like, little bro, I get it. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry that like they made your life so easy for you. They never let you struggle. Right. And now you don't know how to like struggle and find your way on your own because they made your path easy because they love you. They loved you too much. Right. We wasn't in a financial or mental situation when I was a little kid, or they probably would have did the same thing for me out of love. Yeah. But like they tried to give you everything that like they didn't have time or knowledge or resources to give me as a kid. Yeah. So like, but your path is like, now that you this age and they expect this out of you, like you don't have it because they didn't let you do it. Right. And so like we can overcompensate like too much, like you were saying, and like then our kids aren't prepared. My whole thing, and I preach this and even in the fatherhood program from a father's perspective, just a parent perspective in general, my job is to prepare my child for when I'm not here no more. Yeah. I'm not going to always be here. Right. And like I do you no favors by having you feel like you could just always rely on me to bail you out. Right. I got to teach you how to like fend for yourself, whether you're like my son or my daughter and vice versa. And I think like that's the one thing that sometimes parents don't like to think about. Yeah. Parents don't, but they don't understand that like you have to prepare your child for the future so that way they can practice being an adult and make these mistakes, and then you could walk them through it instead of just like holding their hand and just saying, you 18, you 21 now, you grown, figure it out. Right. And like that's not how it works. Yeah, it's like it's a slow roll. Exactly. Right? Baby steps. Yeah. So the preparing for the world is like something that research shows that fathers do a lot more naturally than moms, right? There's a lot of data out there that talks about how like very early on, like dads are like have this thought in the back of their mind, like you're gonna be grown and I want you to understand how to navigate the world. Yep. Sometimes I do that to a fault with my 3-year-old because my wife has to check me sometimes like, yo, you know she's only 3, right? Because go ahead. No. So like not to like make it a joke, but the same thing make you laugh, make you cry. So I had to tell this to these kids yesterday. And I say it often. It's part of like my healing. So like my big cousin, who I love to life, like he went to go start the car, take his 13-year-old daughter to school, had a seizure and died.
Oh yeah.
Like, and if he wasn't the kind of amazing father he was to my baby cousin, that would have absolutely crushed her more than it did. But like to see my baby cousin Nene go through this situation and like the strength that this young black woman showed, I was like, wow, my cousin really did he really poured into her. He really was with her. He had her every day, and he really like coached her and would talk to her like an adult and like prepared her almost for this moment because she had younger siblings, she had other kids, and just like to see her at 13 just like have that, I don't know, that degree of like, it reminded me of my grandma, but like that level of like strength, and like you could tell she was grieving, but like it's grown women, it's grown men that can't keep it together the way that you are, and she cried and but I could just tell that like she was more so at peace than maybe many other kids would be because my cousin poured so much into her.
Yeah.
It's like in 13 years she got enough of a foundation to like be able to carry her through the rest of her days. But like for me, I was already always thinking like, what if I'm not here?
Yeah.
And so for me, that like solidified it, like, oh yeah, like it can happen.
Yeah.
Like it can happen at any time.
There's this quote, and I can't even remember exactly, but it speaks to exactly what you're talking about in terms of like us fathers, and I'll speak from a father's perspective right now, like having to think about, or being a necessity for us to think about the life that our children will lead after we're gone, right? Like that we don't necessarily just have the luxury of being able to think about, the now or even like the near future, but we need to be able to think about like when we're no longer here. And here is a quote that I do remember that I heard recently was that inheritance is something that we give to our child, right? Like the cars, the houses, the clothes, the whatever. But it was like legacy is something that we leave in our child, right? Where you just talked about like the fortitude that your 13 was
yeah, she was 13 at the time, little cousin.
You was close cousin. Okay, yeah, that she had like during that experience, and just like the life that folks will lead after someone is gone, like that legacy, right? You hear all the time, and there's studies that show that like folks who get like large inheritances, like from one generation to another, a lot of times they don't keep it. They don't know how to maintain it because they got the stuff without having the inward ingredients that they needed in order to maintain what they got. And sometimes it's more of a curse than a blessing to them because they got all this stuff, all this money, and they're amplifying the irresponsibilities or the immaturity that they needed or that they didn't need in order to be able to keep the stuff. So you get what I'm saying, but it's wild.
Yeah, I think they call that in more extreme cases, I think they call that affluenza, where like you have a level of affluence and it's almost like to a point where like it's a sickness. So like your affluenza prevents you from really seeing reality. You have a skewed perception and orientation to the world. Like you just always think that like you're supposed to get away with it. Like it's almost like a form of like narcissism in a way. And like but that comes with like a whole lot of power and resources and not being coached on like a lot of responsibility and what that looks like. So I think about like the stuff that's like given to you, you don't really value or appreciate all like that,
right? As
opposed to things that like you earn on your own. And so like if somebody gives you an inheritance, it's like I ain't have to work for this. Like I got it. Like whatever they did to get it, like that's what they did. It's up to me to like spend it. I'm gonna live like a prince. I'm gonna live like a king. I was reading started reading The Richest Man in Babylon, and like in the one part in there where the dude, I forgot who it was, he was like workers for slaves. And so then he had to break it down, explain to him like who his grandfather was and all of that. But at the end of it, he understood that like, nah, worker's your best friend. But like the kid had inherited all this bread from his grandfather and just was like gonna blow it. And he was like, I don't know how to make more of it. I don't have my grandfather's skill. Yeah. And so his grandfather friend just really broke it down to him and was like, nah, you gotta understand worker's your best friend. That's how your grandfather got it. That's how you gonna get it. That's how you gonna keep it. Yeah. And so like we try to like shelter our kids from working and putting in a hard day's work.
Right.
And just even thinking about like, I don't know, I know we were talking about single moms, but like as a dad, when I got my daughter, I make her do extra work, and she's always like, why? But then when like award time come around at school and she's getting awards and getting more awards than her friends, I always make sure I pull her to the side. I'm like, that's why.
Yeah.
That's why.
That's what's up. And that is a good book that you mentioned. It's been like 2 years since I read it, but The Richest Man in Babylon, that is a good book.
Yeah, I'm just starting to read it.
Man, we're getting to the end of part 1 here. This has been a good conversation. In our next segment, or whatever you want to call it, we're going to be talking about co-parenting with our boy Isaiah Gary. So I'll wrap us up.
Yeah, so this has been another edition of the Buffalo Fatherhood Initiative podcast. This is part 1. Make sure y'all stay tuned for part 2. And make sure y'all also hit that like, share, and subscribe button and all that. Follow us on the social medias, man. We're going to keep this thing going. Thank y'all for supporting us.